I never liked Jenna. There, I said it. From the moment she stepped into our lives, it was like a bad omen. You know that gut feeling you get when someone just doesn't sit right with you? That was Jenna for me. She was loud, obnoxious, and had this way of sucking all the energy out of the room with her drama. But Melanie, my wife, was completely blinded by it. She thought Jenna was fun, spontaneous, and some kind of breath of fresh air. I thought she was trouble, plain and simple. From day one, I could see the cracks starting to form. Jenna wasn't just any friend. She was the type who made everything about her. Always boasting about her sex life, like who does that? We'd be having dinner, and she'd casually drop some story about her latest conquest like it was the most normal thing in the world. Oh, you know the guy from the gym? We hooked up in the locker room. He couldn't keep his hands off me. Really? Who talks like that? And what was worse was how Melanie lapped it up, giggling and egging her on, like she was living vicariously through her. I remember the first real red flag. It was this one night where Jenna convinced Melanie to hit up some nightclub. Now, Melanie was never the nightclub type. We were more of a Netflix and wine couple, you know? But here was Jenna, dragging Melanie out to these sleazy places like they were college girls again. I told Melanie straight up that I didn't like it, that she was going to end up in a bad situation, but of course, she brushed me off. It's just one night. I need this, she said. Well, that one night ended with Melanie stumbling through the front door at 3 a.m., completely wasted, barely able to stand. She reeked of booze and bad decisions. I had to help her to bed, where she passed out, still in her heels. I stood there, staring at her, wondering what the hell was happening to my wife. It took her 2 whole days to recover. And Jenna? That bitch didn't even bother to check in. Disappeared like she always did when things went south. That's when I started to feel the anger bubbling up. It wasn't just about that night. It was about the pattern I saw forming. Every time Jenna came around, Melanie changed. She wasn't herself. She started pulling away from me, little by little. They were always off doing something without me like I didn't exist. Then there was the money issue. I swear, Jenna had no shame. She was always scheming, always chasing some new investment. One time, she convinced Melanie to loan her a couple $1,000s. And for what? Some harebrained business idea that went absolutely nowhere. Of course, I found out after the fact. Melanie didn't even ask me. She just did it. When I confronted her about it, she shrugged and said, "It's my money. I can do what I want with it." Yeah, sure, but that's not the point. The point was that Jenna had her claws so deep into Melanie that she could manipulate her like a puppet. I could see it clear as day. And that money? Surprise, surprise, it was never repaid. Just gone. At this point, I was trying not to get involved. I told myself that I couldn't control who Melanie was friends with, even though I knew Jenna was toxic. But things started spiraling fast when Jenna got herself a new boyfriend. It was like she suddenly had a new personality, and she couldn't shut up about him. Every single time they hung out, she'd come over gushing about how amazing he was in bed. Like I'm sitting right there, and she's going on about his skills as if I'm supposed to care. It was awkward, to say the least. And Melanie? She loved it. She'd sit there, laughing along with Jenna, listening to every explicit detail. It didn't seem to bother her at all. At first, it didn't bother me either. I mean, it's just girl talk, right? But there was something about the way Melanie started looking at Jenna, like she was fascinated by her, almost mesmerized. And that's when it hit me. Melanie wasn't just entertained by Jenna's stories. She was envious. She wanted that excitement, that thrill Jenna seemed to be drowning in. That's when the shift really started. Melanie was always up for some new adventure with Jenna, staying out later and later, always with some half-assed excuse. We just went for coffee after our workout. Yeah, right. Who grabs coffee at midnight? But I let it go, convincing myself I was overthinking things. I told myself it was just Jenna's influence rubbing off on her, that Melanie would snap out of it. But deep down, I knew something was off. Melanie was slipping away bit by bit, and I couldn't stop it. I hated Jenna for it. She was like a parasite, feeding off my wife's need for excitement. And the worst part? Melanie couldn't even see it. She was blind to the damage Jenna was doing. To her, to us, to our marriage. And that's when the suspicion started creeping in. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way Melanie would go out of her way to defend Jenna whenever I brought up how toxic she was. "She's just going through a rough patch," Melanie would say. "She needs me right now." Well, what about me? What about our marriage? I couldn't shake the feeling that Jenna was more than just a bad influence, that she was actively pulling Melanie away from me. And worse, I started wondering if something more was going on. I didn't have any proof yet, but my gut told me this wasn't just about their friendship anymore. Jenna was pushing boundaries, and Melanie was following her down a dangerous path. And me? I was stuck on the outside, watching my marriage slip through my fingers. Over time, things started to change. It wasn't immediate, but little by little, the conversations between Melanie and Jenna shifted. They became more personal, more intimate in ways I didn't think were appropriate. It's strange to explain, but I began to feel like I was part of their talks, even though I wasn't directly involved. You know when you're in the next room, and you hear bits and pieces of a conversation? That's how it started. Melanie and Jenna were constantly on the phone, and it wasn't just casual chit-chat anymore. The tone was different, almost secretive, like they were sharing something I wasn't supposed to know about. When Jenna came over, it got worse. Her voice would echo through the house, carrying her ridiculous stories about her sex life. Every damn time, she'd go on and on about how her boyfriend was the best she'd ever had and how their sex life was like something out of a movie. The way she described it, it made me uncomfortable, but Melanie just laughed it off like it was all some big joke. Jenna kept saying how every woman should experience pleasure like that at least once in their life. I remember hearing that and thinking, what the hell? Why was Melanie so entertained by this crap? Then things started to get weird. One day, I was in the kitchen half listening while they sat in the living room. Jenna was going on about her unbelievable boyfriend again. You could hear the smugness in her voice, like she was bragging about winning some prize. And then I heard it, the thing that made my stomach drop. Jenna started joking about how it might be fun to try something new and asked Melanie if she'd ever thought about having a threesome. I froze. I mean, that's not the kind of thing you expect to hear when you're chopping vegetables for dinner. It was like someone had hit me in the chest. Melanie laughed it off, sure, but the laugh was awkward, like she didn't know how to react. Jenna, though? She was pushing, teasing, and making it sound like it was no big deal, just something fun. I stood there, trying to process what I was hearing, hoping to God that it was all just a joke. At that moment, I told myself it was nothing. I trusted Melanie. We'd been through a lot together, and I couldn't believe she'd be interested in something like that. I figured it was just Jenna being her usual over-the-top self, pushing boundaries to see how far she could go. So I let it slide, telling myself I was being paranoid. But something started to gnaw at me after that. You know that gut feeling I mentioned before? Yeah, it came back stronger than ever. I tried to ignore it, but every time Jenna came over or called, I felt like I was intruding on something I wasn't supposed to know about. It wasn't just harmless girl talk anymore. The conversations were too personal, too private. They talked about things they didn't want me to hear, and it pissed me off. Melanie didn't mention any of this to me directly, of course. Why would she? She acted like everything was fine. She was still cooking dinner, watching Netflix with me, making small talk like nothing was different. But I could feel it. There was a shift. She started spending more time with Jenna, and the late nights became more frequent. Every time I'd ask where she was, the answer was the same. We just grabbed coffee after the gym. Coffee? At midnight? Come on. Who buys that excuse? I wanted to call her out, but I didn't want to seem like the jealous, controlling husband. I was trying to be reasonable, trying to trust her. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more obvious it became that something was off. The late nights weren't just random anymore. They were becoming routine. Every few days, Melanie would come home long after midnight, smelling like perfume and something else. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it wasn't just coffee. There were a few times I thought about following her, just to see where she really went. But I stopped myself. What would that accomplish? If she was lying to me, I didn't need to stoop to sneaking around to find out. I'd either confront her, or I wouldn't. And besides, I wanted to believe her. I didn't want to be the paranoid guy, constantly suspecting his wife. I thought, maybe this is just a rough patch, that maybe I was overthinking it. But then there were the small things, like how she'd come home and immediately shower, or how she'd avoid answering my questions directly when I'd ask about her night. If I tried to dig deeper, she'd deflect or turn it into a joke. Oh, "You're not going to get jealous, are you?" she'd say with a smirk, like it was all some game. But I wasn't playing anymore. This wasn't funny to me. One night, she came home later than usual. I was already in bed, half asleep, but I heard her tiptoe into the room. She thought I was out cold, so she didn't even bother to be quiet. I opened my eyes just a crack and saw her standing in front of the mirror, taking off her clothes. And that's when I noticed it, a small red mark on her neck. It wasn't from a workout, I'll tell you that much. My chest tightened, and I felt this wave of nausea roll over me. I wanted to sit up, grab her by the shoulders, and demand answers. But I didn't. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering what the hell was happening to my life. That was the first time I really started to think that maybe it wasn't just in my head. Maybe something was going on, something I couldn't see, but could feel in every fiber of my being. I didn't have proof yet, but the signs were all there. Melanie was pulling away from me, piece by piece, and Jenna was right in the middle of it all, stirring the pot. I kept telling myself to trust her, to believe in our marriage. But with every late night, every hushed conversation with Jenna, every laugh that seemed just a little too forced, my trust chipped away. And I couldn't shake the feeling that Jenna wasn't just a bad influence anymore. She was the catalyst for something much worse, something I wasn't ready to face yet. But soon enough, I'd have no choice. Everything unraveled one night, a night that still plays in my head like a bad dream on repeat. Melanie and I were sitting in the living room, just a typical evening. The TV was on, though I don't even remember what we were watching. I was trying to relax, trying to push down all the suspicions that had been eating away at me for weeks. We were sitting close, but it felt like there was a canyon between us. I could feel her pulling away from me in small, unspoken ways. The glances, the avoidance, it was like she was right there but unreachable. But I kept telling myself to ignore it. Maybe I was overthinking things, right? Then her phone buzzed. It wasn't unusual. Jenna was always blowing up her phone, so I didn't think much of it at first. But Melanie let out this small chuckle, the kind that you give when you're looking at something private. She started watching whatever video Jenna had sent her, trying to angle her phone just out of my line of sight. I couldn't explain why, but my stomach twisted. Something about the way she reacted set off alarms in my head. That gut feeling I'd been ignoring for months was screaming at me now, and I couldn't pretend anymore. I leaned over casually at first, trying to get a glimpse. "What's so funny?" I asked, my voice steady, even though I could feel the panic building inside me. Melanie didn't respond. She just smiled awkwardly, too focused on her phone. My pulse quickened. Something wasn't right. I leaned in further, this time more intentional, and caught a glimpse of the screen. Just a flash, but it was enough. I froze. There were people in the video, 3 of them. At first, it didn't click. I didn't understand what I was seeing. The video was short, grainy, like it was filmed quickly and without much care. But the image was unmistakable. There was Jenna, of course, and then Melanie. My heart stopped, and her boyfriend, all together, in our bedroom. It hit me like a truck. I felt my hand move without thinking, grabbing the phone from her grip. Melanie yelped, startled, and the room plunged into a deafening silence. The video was still playing as I held the phone in my hand, my eyes glued to the screen. Jenna was giggling, drunk off her ass, while Melanie and her boyfriend were. I could barely process it. They were in our bed, my bed, the place where we shared everything, where we made love, where we laughed together, our sanctuary. And now it was desecrated. The world spun. My vision blurred, my head pounded, and I could feel the blood draining from my face. My hands were shaking, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the scene. Melanie was panicking now, trying to snatch the phone back, her words coming out in a frantic jumble. Wait, it's not what it looks like." I could feel bile rising in my throat. "Not what it looks like." I practically growled, my voice low and filled with fury. "That's you, Melanie. In our bed with them." The words felt like acid on my tongue. She backed away, her face pale, as she realized I had seen everything. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. She tried to reach for me, but I pulled back, standing up so fast the chair nearly tipped over. "I can explain," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "We were drunk, Jenna. She pushed me into it. I didn't want to. It just happened. I stood there, staring at her, trying to process what she was saying, but the betrayal hit me like a hammer. My chest tightened, and I could feel my heart racing. You didn't want to? I spat, the anger boiling over. Then why the hell didn't you stop it? Why the hell were you laughing about it just now? How long has this been going on? Tears welled up in her eyes as she stammered out some pathetic excuse. It was just once. I swear it was only that one time. Jenna, she made it seem like a fun idea. We were drunk, and I wasn't thinking straight. I wasn't listening anymore. I couldn't. I couldn't hear anything except the blood rushing in my ears, the sound of my heart shattering into a million pieces. All those nights, all those conversations that seemed off, the lies about coffee after the gym, it all made sense now. The pieces of the puzzle finally clicked together, and the truth was worse than anything I could have imagined. She made you, I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper now, thick with disbelief. You're blaming Jenna for this? Jenna didn't make you do anything. You did this, Melanie. You let this happen. She was sobbing by now, trying to come closer, trying to touch me, but I stepped back, disgusted. I didn't want her anywhere near me. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the person I had married. This was someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of tearing our life apart for some cheap thrill. I'm sorry, she cried, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. Please, just please listen. But I wasn't listening. I was done listening. I felt numb, empty. The anger had turned to cold, hard detachment. I had nothing left to say to her. I grabbed my jacket, my mind racing with the need to escape, to get out of the house before I said or did something I couldn't take back. Go to hell, Melanie. I finally said, my voice hoarse. Just go to hell. And with that, I walked out the door, leaving her there, sobbing and begging for forgiveness. But it didn't matter anymore. Nothing she said could ever fix what she had broken. As I slammed the door behind me, I realized that the life we had built together, the trust, the love, the marriage, it was over. She had destroyed it, and there was no going back. But it didn't end there. Oh no, not even close. Walking out of that house wasn't enough to make the rage disappear. As I drove aimlessly through the dark streets, my mind was spinning, fueled by a dangerous cocktail of betrayal and fury. I kept replaying the scene in my head, seeing Melanie, Jenna, and that smug bastard all over again in my bed. My fists gripped the steering wheel so tight, I thought I might snap it in half. But then, an idea formed, a plan that started as a flicker in the back of my mind but quickly consumed every thought. I wasn't just going to leave it like this. No way. I was going to make them pay. The first thing I did was pull over and transfer the video to my phone. I didn't even care about the legal consequences at that point. All I wanted was for them to feel the same level of humiliation I was drowning in. I needed that satisfaction. Once I had the video safely saved, I deleted the message from Melanie's chat history with Jenna, making sure she wouldn't notice. She had no idea I'd taken it. That was step one. I sat there in the car for a few minutes, staring at the screen, the hate boiling over inside me. My phone buzzed. It was Melanie. Of course, she was trying to call, trying to apologize, trying to find some way to fix the unfixable. The thought of her crying and pleading for forgiveness made me sick. She could cry all she wanted. I was done listening to her excuses. I let the call go to voicemail. And then the real plan started forming. You see, Melanie always had this perfect image. She was the golden child in her parents' eyes, the perfect daughter who could do no wrong. They adored her. She could do anything and still be their little princess. Well, I was about to destroy that image. I wanted them to see her for what she really was. I wanted them to know what she had done, to feel the same disgust I did. They needed to know that their sweet, innocent daughter had been screwing her friend and some random guy in her own marital bed. Without hesitating, I pulled up her parents' contact info on my phone. My fingers hovered over the screen for just a second, that tiny sliver of doubt trying to push through. But then I hit send. I attached the video with a short, brutal message. This is who your daughter really is. That was it. Nothing more. A few minutes later, I got a notification. They had seen it. I could only imagine the horror on their faces, the devastation of seeing their beloved daughter reduced to that. They didn't respond immediately, which was fine by me. I didn't need a reply. The message had been sent, and the damage was done. But that was just the beginning. I wasn't done with Jenna either. She was the ringleader in all of this, and I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. If anything, Jenna had orchestrated this whole mess, manipulating Melanie and dragging her down into this sick game. And Jenna? She was no random nobody. She had a reputation to protect. At her workplace, she was the center of attention, the woman who always had it all together. People admired her. She loved to be the spotlight, to bask in the admiration of others. Well, not for long. That video was my weapon, and I was ready to use it. I didn't even have to think twice. I knew exactly what I needed to do to ruin her career, her perfect little life. I edited the video carefully, making sure to cut out any parts where Melanie's face was visible. This wasn't about protecting Melanie. No, this was about using the video to hit Jenna where it hurt the most, her public image. I uploaded the video online, anonymously of course. I wasn't stupid. The whole world didn't need to know I was behind it. I posted it on a few shady forums, the kind where these things spread like wildfire. It didn't take long. Within hours, the video was everywhere, getting shared and reshared. By the next day, it was viral. And Jenna? She couldn't hide from it. Her face was plastered all over the internet. Her name dragged through the mud. Her coworkers saw it. Hell, her boss saw it. I heard through the grapevine that she tried to deny it at first, said it was a fake, but the evidence was too clear. She was finished. A few days later, she was fired, and her perfect little reputation was shattered into pieces. Melanie, meanwhile, kept trying to fix things between us. She must have called me 100 times, sent text after text, leaving voicemail after voicemail, each one more pathetic than the last. She was desperate, saying how sorry she was, how much she regretted everything. It was a mistake, she kept saying. It didn't mean anything, but it didn't matter what she said. My mind was already made up. I wasn't going to forgive her. I couldn't. The betrayal was too deep, too raw. And after what I'd done, after sending that video to her parents and wrecking Jenna's career, I knew there was no going back. Even if I wanted to, which I didn't, the bridge had been burned. Melanie didn't know it yet, but her parents had already seen the video. I waited, knowing it was only a matter of time before they confronted her. And when they did, I could only imagine the fallout. I wasn't there to witness it firsthand, but I didn't need to be. I knew exactly how they'd react. The disappointment, the shame, it would break them, and Melanie would feel that weight. She'd lose the one thing that always made her feel secure, the unwavering approval of her parents. And that, to me, was justice. As the days passed, I could feel the revenge settling in, like a fire that had finally burned out after raging uncontrollably. I wasn't proud of what I'd done, but I wasn't sorry either. They deserved it, Melanie and Jenna both. They thought they could destroy my life without consequences. They thought I'd just roll over and take it. No. I made sure they felt every ounce of the pain I had endured, and I didn't regret it for a second. The divorce was quick. I guess that's what happens when the evidence is so damning that there's really nothing left to argue over. Melanie didn't have a leg to stand on, and deep down, I think she knew that from the moment I caught her. The shock of being exposed so completely left her with no fight. She didn't even try to contest anything. There was no back and forth, no dramatic court battles. Just a cold, swift ending to a marriage that once felt unbreakable. It didn't help that Melanie's world had come crashing down around her. Her parents, the same ones who'd always seen her as their perfect little girl, turned on her the second they saw that video. I wasn't there for the fallout, but I heard about it. Apparently, it was brutal. I can only imagine the horror on their faces when they realized what their daughter had been up to. They didn't speak to her for weeks. The disappointment was too much for them to handle, and they cut ties almost immediately. I guess they weren't as forgiving as Melanie had hoped. Then there were her friends, or should I say, former friends. The scandal spread faster than wildfire, especially after Jenna's video went viral. Even though I had kept Melanie's face out of it, people started to put two and two together. You know how gossip works? It never stays hidden for long. Whispers turned into rumors. Rumors turned into truths. Melanie tried to deny it at first, claiming it was all a big misunderstanding, but it didn't matter. People knew. The shame followed her everywhere. It didn't take long for her to become isolated. Friends who had once stood by her side now distanced themselves, probably out of fear that their own lives would be tainted by association. After all, who wants to be friends with the woman caught up in a public sex scandal? It was brutal, and I could see the toll it took on her. But at that point, I couldn't bring myself to care anymore. She had brought this on herself. As for me, the divorce process was strangely liberating. I thought it would be painful, that I'd feel some sort of loss or grief, but there was nothing, just emptiness. The whole thing was done within a couple of months, just paperwork, signatures, and a few uncomfortable meetings with the lawyers. In the end, I got what I wanted. The house, my car, the life I had built before Melanie ever walked into it. I was free, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally breathe. The day the divorce was finalized, I didn't feel like celebrating. It wasn't a victory. It was just the end of a chapter one never expected to close so soon. But it was over, and that was enough for me. I was ready to move on. I had to. And that's when I met Amelia. Amelia was everything Melanie wasn't. I remember the first time I saw her. She had this confidence about her, the kind that just fills the room without even trying. She wasn't loud or flashy like Jenna or manipulative like Melanie. No, she was grounded, smart, and most importantly, ambitious. I think that's what attracted me the most. She had her own life, her own goals, and she wasn't interested in dragging me into her problems. Amelia had her shit together, and after everything I had been through, that was exactly what I needed. We met by chance, through a mutual friend who dragged me to some social event I didn't even want to attend. Funny how life works like that. I was sitting there, half paying attention to the small talk when Amelia sat down next to me and struck up a conversation. At first, I was guarded. After Melanie, I wasn't exactly ready to trust another woman so quickly. But Amelia was different. She wasn't trying to force anything. She was just herself, real, unfiltered, and refreshingly honest. We started hanging out casually, no pressure. But soon it became something more. I won't lie, I was hesitant at first. I wasn't sure if I was ready for another relationship so soon after the divorce. But Amelia had a way of making me feel like I could leave the past behind. She never pried into my personal life, never asked about Melanie or the scandal that had ruined everything. She didn't need to. She just let me be, and for that I was grateful. The more time I spent with her, the more I realized how much of myself I had lost in my marriage. I had been so consumed with trying to fix things, trying to make Melanie happy, that I had forgotten what it felt like to just exist. Amelia brought me back to that. She reminded me of what it was like to feel normal again, to laugh without worrying about the weight of betrayal hanging over my head. With her, I didn't have to pretend. I didn't have to fix anything. I could just be. And that's when I knew it was time to truly move on. I'll never forget the day I finally let go of the anger I had been holding on to for so long. It wasn't some grand epiphany or dramatic moment. It was quiet, almost unnoticeable. I was sitting in my new apartment, looking at the city skyline, and I realized I didn't hate Melanie anymore. I didn't care about Jenna, the scandal, or any of it. It was in the past, and I was done letting it control me. Amelia and I started building something new together. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. We were real. She challenged me in ways I hadn't been challenged before, pushing me to focus on myself, on my own happiness, instead of constantly trying to fix someone else's mess. With her, I found something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, I could have a future that wasn't defined by the betrayal I had endured. I can't say everything was easy. Healing takes time, and there are still moments where the old wounds sting. But with Amelia, I learned to stop looking back. I learned to let go of the bitterness, the anger, and the pain that had consumed me for so long. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a future worth looking forward to. I thought I was done with Melanie after the divorce, that she'd disappear from my life and become just another painful memory. But, of course, it wasn't that simple. A few months after everything was finalized, she showed up at my door, looking like hell. I hadn't seen her in person since the last court date, and when I opened the door, it was like a ghost from my past had come back to haunt me. Her face was pale, eyes swollen from crying, and she stood there like someone who didn't know where else to go. For a moment, I felt nothing. The rage, the betrayal, the heartbreak, it had all faded by then. But seeing her there, broken, brought back flashes of what we once had, what we had lost. I didn't say anything at first, just stood there in the doorway, waiting for her to speak. "I'm sorry," she whispered, barely able to look me in the eye. "I'm so sorry." She was crying before she even finished the sentence. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face, to shut her out the way she had shut me out of her life when she let Jenna drag her down into that mess. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped aside, letting her in. She sat down on the couch, the same couch where we used to watch movies together, where we shared so many moments that now felt like they belonged to someone else's life. She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face, and started to speak, her words coming out in a frantic mess of apologies and regrets. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice shaking. "I wasn't thinking. Jenna, she pushed me, but it's not her fault. I should have stopped it. I should have fought harder. I lost everything, and it was all over something so stupid. I lost you." Her words hung in the air, heavy and desperate. "I lost our family." I didn't say anything for a while. I just watched her, the woman I had once loved, sitting there in pieces. Part of me felt sorry for her. I could see that she was suffering, that she was dealing with the consequences of her actions. But another part of me, the part that had moved on, felt nothing but cold detachment. She begged me for another chance. She said she'd do anything to fix what was broken, that she regretted everything. She talked about how she missed me, how she missed us, and how she'd give anything to go back and undo what she had done. "I want us back," she whispered through her tears. I stayed calm. There wasn't any anger left in me. Not really. The truth was I had already let it all go. "I don't hold a grudge anymore," I said, my voice even. "But there's no going back, Melanie. That part of our lives is over." She looked up at me, her eyes searching for any sign of hope, but I knew she could see the finality in my words. "I'm not angry," I continued. "I'm not even hurt anymore. But you and we're done. We were over the moment you crossed that line with Jenna and that guy. You destroyed what we had, and there's no fixing it." The silence that followed felt like it stretched on forever. Melanie nodded, wiping her face with the sleeve of her sweater. "I get it," she said quietly. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry." I nodded, and with that, she stood up. There wasn't much else to say. We had both said what needed to be said. She walked out the door, and as I watched her leave, I felt nothing. No sadness, no anger. Just closure. But that wasn't the last I saw of her. For a while, Melanie and I kept in touch, strangely enough. We'd text occasionally, checking on each other like distant acquaintances who used to share something important. It was awkward, but it felt like the mature thing to do. There was no hostility, no lingering resentment. Just a weird, detached sense of moving on. I think we both thought we could stay friends, that maybe enough time had passed for us to be civil, without all the old wounds reopening. Then Amelia came into the picture. Melanie hadn't met Amelia yet, but she knew about her. I wasn't trying to flaunt my new relationship, but word gets around. One day, I was out with Amelia, grabbing lunch at a small cafe we liked to frequent. We were sitting there, laughing and talking, when I saw Melanie walk in. The second she saw us, her face changed. It was like she had been punched in the gut. Her eyes locked onto Amelia, then shifted to me. I could see the jealousy written all over her face, clear as day. It was a look I hadn't seen in years. For a moment, I felt bad for her, but only for a moment. Amelia didn't notice at first, too caught up in the conversation, but I watched as Melanie stood there, frozen for a few seconds, before quickly turning and walking out. Later that day, Melanie texted me. It was brief, just a single message. "I saw you today. She's beautiful. I'm glad you're happy." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. And after that, Melanie stopped texting, stopped calling, stopped trying to stay in my life. I guess seeing me with Amelia was the final blow, the confirmation that I had truly moved on and that there was no hope of reconciliation. Amelia was everything Melanie wasn't. Confident, smart, kind, and most importantly, honest. She was secure in who she was, and she didn't need to play games or seek validation from anyone else. Being with her felt like I had finally found solid ground again, like I wasn't constantly teetering on the edge of something crumbling beneath my feet. Melanie lost me forever that day, and I think she finally realized it. Whatever hope she had been clinging to was gone. She could apologize all she wanted, but the truth was, I had a new life now. A better life. One that didn't include her. I don't hate Melanie anymore. I don't even feel sorry for her. I just don't feel anything. She made her choices, and she's living with the consequences. As for me, I'm finally free, with a future that doesn't involve looking back. The past is done, and I've moved on. She's not part of that anymore.